Please keep your mute on while I run through this. I've got maybe half an hour, perhaps a little bit less, and then we will open up for discussion. Please load in questions, comments using the chat function as I go. So I want to share with you a little bit what's going on around the world, and then I want to drill down into what a cluster organization does. So let me start with a lady that I'm sure a number of you are very familiar with, Ulla Engelmann from Brussels, from the European Commission. Ulla is very clear in saying clustering is a key feature of the European economy. And as I look around Europe, some 3,000 clusters have been identified, clusters in the sense of local specializations. And what is important about these 3,000 clusters is that this is where 1 in 4 jobs are, particularly the export-orientated jobs. So therefore, particularly the jobs that are pulling wealth into any of our regions. And this is information that comes from the European Commission. I like the way they say clusters matter. In part for a region, this is where we see the higher wages. In part, this is where we see more global frontier firms. And the third point I want to emphasize here, this is where we see more rapidly growing startups. And see more rapidly growing startups because it's within a cluster, be it furniture manufacturers or biotech companies, it's within a cluster that particularly there is the ecosystem, a supportive ecosystem that helps those businesses grow. Cluster Excellence Denmark has done a lot of work, not just in facilitating clusters across Denmark, but also in really understanding very deeply, why are these clusters important to us in Denmark? And it's in part innovation, it's productivity. But let me highlight this point. What Denmark has found is that particularly within clusters, we see more small businesses engaging internationally, more small businesses in part because they're able to hunt as a pack, able to lever off each other rather than trying to go international as a solo player. If we look right across Europe, there are some 30 national programs in 20 countries. Denmark is one of those countries. We've got participants from Denmark with us today, from Germany, from Estonia. We've got participants from Turkey, but also from other parts of the world, and I'll pull in some other parts of the world shortly. So 30 national cluster programs, 20 countries, demonstrating quite clearly that cluster development is of importance. It is significantly supported across Europe. Some piece of work has recently been done in looking at what are the key activities that are coming through from the clusters that are being supported by the European Commission. And I just want to highlight 3 things that really come through. First, cross-sectoral collaboration, particularly helped when there's more than one cluster, and I'll take you into some places where there is more than one cluster being developed. Second point, it's support for SMEs, particularly support for SMEs in helping them find their way through a clutter of support agencies. And the third dimension here being highlighted by the European Commission is internationalization again. There's a meeting later this week in Malaga, Clusters Meet Regions. Clusters as key drivers of regional development and growth. A great summary of why clusters are important to Europe, but also important close to my home across the ditch in Australia. And this is one of 3 nationally funded organizations, one of 3 industry growth centers. And I like the way They highlight clusters can help Australia get there. It's the increased productivity, it's the innovation, again highlighting it's the new business formation, it's supporting the startups. We've got a number of Canadians with us today. Canada is certainly blowing its trumpet loud and clear when it comes to cluster development with the supercluster program. And the minister in Ottawa has a very heavy stick, a very heavy carrot really, offering $1 billion over 5 years to support just 5 clusters. There were some 50 clusters that came in with competitive proposals, and just 5 of those have been funded. And a key point here, public co-funding in Canada, as in many other parts of the world with similarly structured cluster programs. A key organizing principle is co-funding, some degree of funding from public agencies, but also funding from other sources. Let me move from a national level to a city level. And using Oslo as my first example, and like the way Oslo very firmly says, we know about renewable energy. It's one of our clusters. I like the way Brussels and the Regional Development Agency in Brussels is saying, we've got 6 clusters that we're focusing on. Green tech is one of those. And these 6 clusters together are the activities that particularly pull in wealth to our businesses in Brussels. I think we have Hamburg with us today. And like the way in which Hamburg, in a similar way, is focusing on 8 particular clusters there. It's life science, logistics, it's a health cluster, creative, renewable energy, a maritimes one, media, Hamburg aviation. Hamburg aviation has also taken the lead in linking similar clusters across Europe. And there are some 35 aviation clusters that are linked across Europe. Maybe it's 40 now. I think one of those is in Shannon, Ireland. Another slice in thinking about cluster development is clusters as a focus for transition, clusters as a focus for transformation. Certainly the green economy, digital transitions are there. 2 years ago, clusters across Europe, in many parts of the world, even in places like Ecuador in South America, where the IT cluster brought together a large number of players to help develop the competencies for small businesses in using IT, being able to collect revenue electronically. So clusters helping for transitions, helping where there's been an external shock. Clusters, in part, creating a community where people can lever off each other, learn from each other, work with each other. I want to drill down in one particular aspect in this session with you. And I'm drawing here on the TCI Cluster Policy Roadmap. If you're not familiar with TCI, I encourage you, if you search TCI Network, you'll find it in Barcelona. I should confess I'm a founder of TCI, and it's good to have TCI Oceania from Tasmania participating in this session today. TCI recently came out with a policy roadmap, and I want to share with you part of what is in this roadmap. It's part, I'm drawing on it. It's not exactly what is in the roadmap. This is my interpretation, if you like, my focus, my reading of key aspects from that roadmap. There are 6 key elements that I want to highlight. The first one, strong professional cluster team. A CEO, often called the cluster manager, and staff. Project-orientated team with relevant skills. And when I think about relevant skills for this team, I would argue it's not necessarily knowing about IT or biotech as that cluster team is starting. but rather it is a team that particularly has relationship building skills, a team of folk that are comfortable in bringing, for example, a group of competitors together and helping those competitors work through where might there be common agendas amongst us. Supporting the cluster team is a board, governance of the clustering initiative. Triple helix is a term used here. It's a common design concept by Triple Helix. I'm thinking of business and public agencies and academia. And academia could be a tertiary institute. It could be a public R&D institute, could be in a rural community, even a high school or college. Triple helix, at least on the board, and a number of boards are quadruple helix, including social engagement. Typically, it is business in the majority, it's business in the chair, and typically it is an initiative that is moving at the speed of business. It's a board that is composed of senior folk, members in leading positions within their own organizations. This doesn't work if we have a board with marketing managers or a board with second or third level public agency folk. This does need the heavyweights, the senior folk that are able to make decisions, but also have got knowledge that they're able to bring together, test, and perhaps at times very heavily debate it with each other, and then work through, okay, how do we interpret these different strands of information for our particular cluster to help it move forward? Third point, financial stability for the cluster organization. Clear financial commitment from business, which doesn't come in year one, but hopefully starts to come in year two, certainly should be happening by year three of a clustering initiative. And financial commitment from businesses, committing to the annual upkeep of the clustering organization, but also, my second point here, long-term public co-funding, and ideally public co-funding from multiple sources. And I see sometimes clustering initiatives that receive funding from just one agency. And the danger then is perhaps the management or the politicians supporting that agency change their priorities, or perhaps that one funding agency has an undue influence over the activity, the agenda, the forward agenda of that clustering initiative. So much prefer, as I'm saying here, funding from multiple sources. And those multiple sources could be a number of public agencies at a national level, at a regional level, could be academic institutions, as well as I was saying, business. Fourth point, a cluster organization with a unique mission, a strategy, a roadmap for moving forward, focusing on what matters for the cluster and can only be achieved through the cluster. So saying here in part, a cluster organization is not, should not, never should be competing with an existing association, competing with a chamber of commerce, competing with a public agency is already doing. An effective cluster organization has got to find its own agenda, its own space. So hence this emphasis on a unique mission. 5, a broad service portfolio. It's not one or two things that any cluster should be doing. It's identifying, particularly identifying by listening carefully to the needs of businesses, sitting down with the CEOs of the businesses, understanding their issues, their difficulties, their roadblocks, and then exploring from that, where might there be common opportunities, where might there be collaborative engagements? And encourage you, think about analysis and the cluster development as in part managing a dynamic process. It's not a question of let's do our research, let's understand what we need to do and then set the agenda for 3-5 years. encourage you to think carefully, to incorporate the concept of learning by doing rather than paralysis by analysis. And often as we engage with projects within our cluster, we get much deeper understanding of what really are the training needs, what might be the key priority export market. My final point that I want to make here, it's partnerships. Partnerships with relevant organizations. No cluster organization, no cluster manager can make this happen by flying alone. It helps for any clustering initiative if there is a hosting organization as you start. And great to see what a number of you have in Ireland, where a tertiary institute has become that hosting organization. But I would argue too, for long-term development, the cluster organization needs to be independent. It needs to be neutral. It shouldn't be beholden to any one player, any one stakeholder within that cluster. I want to take partnerships and relevant organizations a little bit further. And when I think about partnerships, it's public agencies. It's, for those of you in Ireland, it could be the EU, it could be in the Republic, national government, the Irish government, it could be county councils. It's certainly the private sector, which could include chambers, it could include a business association, a professional association. It's academia, and academia in a broader sense. It's from high schools through to vocational training, through to tertiary institutions and public R&D. But in many, many parts of the world, these three elements, the three elements of the triple helix, are too often flying solo. They aren't actually aligned around the needs of a particular cluster. And one concept that I use is drawing on the Beatles. I get by with a little help from my friends. Sorry, I'm not very good at singing. But a question to any cluster managers, who are your friends? Who are your buddies? Who are your buddies in public agencies, in private sector organizations, in academia? Who are your buddies that you might pull in, tap on the shoulders, and invite them to be part of an informal cluster ignition team? And I'm thinking particularly of people from other organizations that are perhaps knocking on the same door, talking to the same businesses that you are. And what I find is often this group of people have actually never sat around the same table before. And a key role for a cluster manager is helping bring alignment, helping bring cohesion amongst what is often a clutter of support organizations. I referred a moment ago to broad service portfolio, a wide range of projects. Let me share with you some of the projects that I see many clustering initiatives doing. Certainly it's networking, providing opportunities for people to mix and mingle, for people within your cluster to meet, to get to know each other. And perhaps there is a speaker at a regular event, but it's the aftermatch function, the socializing, that is often the key activity, the most important activity. Skills development, training. For almost any high growth cluster, wherever it is in the world, the availability of skills, the availability of talent is a key constraint to the development of that cluster. Internationalization, I talked about this earlier, internationalization, and using this term much more, yes, it's export development, but it is also, for example, investment attraction. And often it's two-way investment attraction. You have been great in Ireland in securing investments from the US, from around the world. But hopefully some of your homegrown businesses have now got the competencies, the wherewithal to be investing in the home cluster of some of those, from where some of those businesses come. It's certainly R&D, it's technology, it's supporting startups, it's cluster visibility, it's blowing the trumpet on your cluster, increasing awareness in your corner of Galway, across Ireland, across Europe, across the world. Making it easy for customers to find your businesses, making it easy perhaps for students to identify, yes, there's a training course there that is of particular interest to me. Cost reduction, maybe. Collaboration in purchasing packaging, perhaps collaboration in organizing sea freight or air freight from our community. Final one here, business finance, seed fundings, startup funding, venture capital. I see I've got startups on there. Let me make this point. Perhaps for your clusters in Ireland or wherever you are in the world, maybe even more important than startups are the scale-ups, the businesses that have already got a bit of a track record, already established customers, and are now ripe to scale up. And often in any community, that's really where we see the growth in jobs. It's not with 10 startups, but maybe it's with 2 or 3 scale-up businesses that are moving perhaps from 5 staff to 25 to 100 staff, and perhaps moving quite rapidly. And highlighting scale-ups here, because when I'm reviewing a clustering initiative, a key thing I look at is, do scale-ups stay? Or do they, after a while, as they realize, woohoo, the ground here, this is not a fertile environment for my business. I need to move to Dublin. I need to move to London, to Silicon Valley, to Hamburg, to somewhere else in the world that provides a more fertile ecosystem. I mentioned investment attraction a moment ago. And what I see with an effective cluster development program is that it enables a very targeted approach and enables a cluster, a region, to change gear from what can we offer, and what can we offer perhaps in the sense of we can offer facilities at a subsidized rent. Perhaps we can offer skilled workforce. Perhaps we can offer a relatively low cost skill. It enables us to change gear from thinking about what can we offer to what do we need? What do we need? What are the holes in our ecosystems? What are the holes, perhaps? What are the new technologies, the emerging technologies? And who's number one in the world in developing that technology? So cluster development often enables a very targeted investment attraction approach, but perhaps we're able to go to the investment attraction agency and describe, this is exactly the sort of company that we're looking for to fill a gap in our competencies in our cluster. A short plug coming in before I finish. Cloder has invited me to participate in another series of online training courses, 4 90-minute training webinars coming up starting in March. 4 modules, each an hour and a half. Each will be interactive. First module, quite a bit more on what exactly is a cluster, why are they important. The second module, the how. I will take people quickly through a 12-step process. I will drill down when I've got a bit more time. And what exactly is a cluster ignition team? Who might we invite to be a member of our cluster ignition team for our cluster? The third session, cluster engagement, different types of business collaboration, also exploring what is the role of a cluster manager. After that third session, there will be a short survey to the participants, and then the final session on the 12th of April, responding to whatever are the topics that come through from that survey. Each of the participants will get a copy of the Cluster Development Handbook that Catriona kindly waived as she was introducing me. If you'd like to know more, please make contact with Clodagh, send her an email. As I finish, let me make these points. Encourage you, if you're considering cluster development, or if you are, or perhaps already a cluster manager, a reminder here, think big, be bold, but you need to start small. Start with the baby steps. Move fast, and in part by moving fast, be comfortable in learning by doing, and build teams. You can't do this flying solo. And a real mistake for any cluster organization is thinking, well, this is our turf, this is what we're doing. Fundamentally, a cluster organization is a partnership structure, and it's a partnership structure to mobilize around the key agendas, the key things that we need to do to move our particular cluster forward. It is about learning to swim together, and by swimming together, able to go after even bigger fish. Let me hold there. And
thank you.
Catriona, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ifor. Thank you very much. We've had a few questions and they've been coming through in the chat box. And if he's ready there, I'm going to actually invite Pete